The movie begins in 1937. It introduces an old man named Hannon, who is residing in a hotel room. The old man is engaged in writing a letter, hinting at an air of mystery surrounding his actions. Despite his wealth and the respect he commands from others, there is a sense of secrecy and hidden motives in his behavior. Hannon then visits the hotel bar, handing over the letter to the owner with specific instructions to deliver it to a man named Douglas. However, the owner of the bar betrays him, and instead of delivering the letter to Douglas, the bar's owner, opens it and starts to read it. Hannon arrives at home, and by his commotion, his wife wakes up and questions him about restarting his cigarette habit, to which he responds that he hasn't. The narrative takes an unexpected turn as we zoom in on Hannon's eyes, revealing a spark within them. The subsequent scene unveils him waking up in a big modern machine, indicating that the world depicted in 1937 is not real but a computer-generated program. In reality, Hannon is a scientist deeply engrossed in his work, and the events in the apparent 1937 setting are part of a computer program. He lives in Los Angeles. Hannon Fuller owns a multi-billion-dollar computer enterprise and is the inventor of a newly completed virtual reality VR simulation of 1937 Los Angeles, filled with simulated humans unaware they are computer programs. This revelation suggests that Hannon and his company are involved in creating a highly sophisticated and realistic virtual environment. Hannon, who seemed to be a wealthy man living in a different era, is in fact an active participant in this computer-generated world. It is 1999. He arrives and heads straight to a bar. Afterward, he contacts a person named Douglas Hall, to whom he had previously left a letter. Douglas is, in fact, his friend and protege. They have been collaborating on this program for several years. Despite his efforts, Douglas doesn't receive the call. Consequently, he leaves a voicemail for Douglas, expressing that he has made an incredible discovery. This discovery has the potential to bring about a significant change in the existence of our world in a very short period. While he's on the phone trying to reach Douglas, someone comes from the door and kills Hannon. In the following scene, we encounter the same man, Douglas. He is at home waking up and checking his voice messages. However, before he listens to Hannon's message, he discovers that Hannon has passed away, leading to deep sadness. The police inform him and take him to see Hannon's lifeless body. The assigned police officer, LAPD Detective Larry McBain, inquires whether Hannon had any conflicts or recent altercations. Douglas responds that Hannon has no enemies. Hannon was well liked by everyone. However, due to their close relationship and Douglas also being the heir to the company, the police initially considered Douglas as a potential suspect. He arrives at his house where, upon questioning by the police, he explains that he and Hannon were collaborating on the same program and expresses his astonishment. Douglas emphasizes that Hannon was wealthy with a significant amount of money. Meanwhile, a girl named Jane arrives, claiming to be Hannon's estranged daughter. This revelation surprises Douglas, as he has no prior knowledge of Hannon having a daughter. In response, Douglas informs Jane that he was unaware of her existence, but Jane insists that her father often spoke about him and expressed a desire for them to meet, prompting her visit. Larry begins to interrogate Jane, while Douglas proceeds to his lab on the 13th floor. This floor houses a unique lab where only specialized computers operating the VR system are located. Additionally, there are machines that enable individuals to enter the virtual world. The scene shifts to a man who is with Douglas and has been part of the project with Hannon for an extended period. As a software engineer, he possesses in-depth knowledge of the projects. He expresses deep sorrow over Hannon's death, emphasizing Hannon's exceptional scientific capabilities. He questions how someone could harm such a brilliant scientist. Hannon's innovative creations, including machines that generate a simulated world, set him apart from ordinary reality. The simulated world created by Hannon is incredibly detailed and realistic. It provides individuals with the opportunity to experience life within it. However, a significant aspect is that when someone enters the simulated world and forms connections with its corresponding characters, they download their mind into a simulated human, which also looks the same as the real person. It becomes a transformative experience where the person perceives the life within the simulation as their own. Although Hannon extensively used this simulated world, Douglas has not yet ventured into it. Hannon discovered something important within that world and aimed to convey it to Douglas through a letter, but only in the simulated world. Following this, Douglas observes Jane heading somewhere and decides to tail her. Meanwhile, Detective Larry arrives at the same lab on the 13th floor and questions Douglas's partner, Whitney, hoping to uncover information about the murderer. Whitney discloses everything about the computer program, but the detective takes it lightly, assuming it to be a joke since the program was unknown to everyone until now. Douglas catches up with Jane, questioning why her father never mentioned her despite being open about everything. Jane reveals that her father contacted her because he wanted her to shut down his company. Jane consults her lawyer about shutting down the company, but he informs her that it's impossible since before his death, Hannon passed the ownership to Douglas. Douglas, however, remains oblivious to this fact. Once the revelation comes to light, it becomes a news story. Detective Larry learns of this news and approaches Douglas, expressing suspicion about his involvement in Hannon's death. Larry finds it peculiar that the company transferred to Douglas immediately after Hannon's demise, questioning the coincidence. Detective Larry asserts that all evidence points to Douglas as the killer, suggesting that he may have murdered Hannon to gain control of the company. Douglas, surprised, claims ignorance about the company being in his name. Detective Larry points out that Hannon's final call was to Douglas, raising suspicion. He advises Douglas not to leave the city until there is progress in the case. Returning to the office, Douglas checks his voicemails, discovering Hannon's message stating that he left a message for him in the virtual world. After this, Douglas starts checking in the computer to learn about Hannon's last visit and which characters Hannon met in the virtual world in the last visit. There, he discovers Hannon's last interactions and the characters he encountered in the virtual world. Utilizing Jason Whitney's assistance, Douglas sets a timer for 1 hour and connects with a character named John Ferguson, a bank clerk whose entire consciousness is simulated. But remember, they don't know they are simulated, and by any means they are as real as the creators. Upon entering the virtual world for the first time, Douglas is astonished to find that everything appears incredibly real, unlike his expectations of a purely simulated environment. Now, Douglas finds himself fully immersed in the mind and memories of John Ferguson, the bank cashier. Leaving the bank, he begins his quest to locate all the individuals Hannon interacted with during his last visit to the virtual world. The primary objective is to retrieve the message Hannon left for him. Among these characters, Douglas encounters Hannon's simulated persona, an old man whose consciousness was used by Hannon in the virtual world. Unfortunately, Douglas gains no useful information from him, as characters in the virtual world tend to lose their memories when someone from the real world enters, causing a temporary blackout of their consciousness. In his search, Douglas encounters each person Hannon had interacted with during his last visit to the virtual world. Finally, he meets Jerry Ashton, the bartender who is the simulated persona of Whitney, the one to whom Hannon had given the letter. Douglas introduces himself and inquires if there is any message for him. However, despite Hannon leaving a message, Jerry denies having one. As the timer expires, Douglas returns to the real world and wakes up. In the virtual world, once Douglas returns, the characters regain control of their bodies but lose all memory of how they arrived and what transpired, a phenomenon experienced by everyone at some point in the simulation, making it a normal occurrence in the virtual world. In the real world, a man comes to meet Douglas. He's a local bartender and takes him to talk to him alone. He goes and starts blackmailing him, stating he knows that Douglas has killed that old man. Douglas, confused about what he is talking about, defends himself. Then the attacker ran away. Douglas meets Jane and says that he has begun to doubt his innocence. He then tells her all about the machine and the virtual world. When the bartender is murdered after he claims to have witnessed a meeting between Douglas and Hannon on the night Hannon was murdered, Douglas is arrested. He is released when Jane gives the police an alibi, claiming he was with her the whole night when Hannon was murdered, but we know this is a lie. With the assistance of his associate Whitney, Douglas attempts to find a message that Hannon left for him inside the simulation, again. Entering the virtual reality, Douglas once again becomes a bank clerk named John Ferguson. The message that Hannon, with a bartender named Jerry Ashton, who read the message, now knows that he is an artificial being, a simulated program. The contents of the letter included instructions of how to reach the edge of the simulation while driving a car in a single direction. For a long time, one must reach the edge of the program's limit. Jerry followed these instructions and found himself broken and betrayed by his new revelation when he saw the edge of the simulation. Earlier, Ashton noticed that Ferguson switched places with Douglas in the men's restroom of the hotel where Ashton works, and begins to realize that something was wrong, relating these switches as part of the program. Frightened and angry, Ashton tries to kill Douglas. Douglas barely survives to escape the VR and leaving John confused again about what happened and why he can't remember the past few hours. McBain informs Douglas that Jane does not exist, as Hannon never had a daughter. Douglas tracks her down only to discover her double, Natasha Molinaro, working as a grocery store clerk. But Molinaro does not recognize Douglas, hinting to the fact that someone downloaded into her persona, implicating this world as a simulation as well. This leads Douglas to perform an experiment outside the VR system, something that Hannon's message instructed him to try: drive to a place where he never would have considered going otherwise. He does so, and discovers a point beyond which the world becomes a crude wireframe model. Douglas grasps the revelation behind Hannon's message. 1999 Los Angeles is itself a simulation. When I was watching this scene, I realized that this movie is even better than The Matrix. Jane Fuller now downloads into Natasha and explains the truth to Douglas. His world is one of thousands of virtual worlds, but it is the only one in which one of the residents has developed a virtual world of his own, a simulation within a simulation. Now this gives me eerie vibes. Jane Fuller lives in the real world outside the simulation in the 1990s. After Hannon's death, she entered the virtual version to assume the guise of Hannon's daughter in order to gain control of the company, and shut down the simulated 1937 reality to prevent further complications, a plan foiled by Douglas being made the company heir. The virtual Douglas is modeled after David, Jane's real-world husband, though Jane has since fallen in love with Douglas. David committed the murders via Douglas's body, being driven to increasingly jealous and psychopathic behavior from the prolonged use of VR to live out his dark fantasies. Whitney enters the 1937 simulation, assuming the body of the bartender Jerry Ashton, who has kidnapped Ferguson and bound him in the trunk of his car. Whitney is not aware of this. And upon downloading, he's in the middle of the traffic and causes a minor accident. Once the police stops him, they realize what is in the trunk and ask him to open it. Whitney, scared of what he just saw, completely distracted on the highway, gets hit by a truck. When Whitney is killed in a car crash inside the 1937 simulation, Ashton's consciousness takes control of Whitney's body in the 1990s simulation and takes Douglas hostage. Douglas tells Ashton that this is not in the real world either, and that they are both products of a VR simulation. Douglas takes Ashton to the place where he was born, a computer lab. At this moment, David assumes control of Douglas again to kill Ashton and then attempts to force himself onto Jane. Jane is rescued by Detective McBain, who shoots and kills David. McBain at this point has realized the nature of his reality and jokingly asks Jane, "So is somebody going to unplug me now?" She answers no, so McBain follows with the request, "Look, do me a favor. When you get back to wherever it is you come from, just leave us the hell alone down here, okay?" David's death as Douglas in the 1990s simulation allows Douglas's artificial consciousness to take control of David's body in the real world. He wakes up in 2024, connected to a VR system. He disconnects the system and finds Jane and her father, the real Hannon Fuller. Jane wants to tell Douglas all about the simulation, and just as she begins, the film ends. The screen image collapses to a thin line of light before going dark like a computer monitor being turned off, hinting a more sinister plot at play. And that's all for today's dose of sci-fi goodness. Don't forget to subscribe to Recap Nest if you want more amazing stories like these. Here's another 2 videos with similar theme. Click and start binging on some sci-fi sauce.